Nā rangatira e nā hohoki, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. If you're wondering the connection between the three keynotes, I too am a redhead. It might be difficult to see, but 40 years in education means that it's got some highlights that Jason and Chris haven't got yet. Getting there though. I grew up in an Irish Catholic home where there wasn't a lot of food on the table on many occasions, but I was fortunate enough to be looked after by loving parents. So were my 7 brothers and sisters. School was a refuge and a place of constant wonder when I was little. At school we went exploring the world and I learnt to love learning. My nostalgic, misty-eyed memories of my childhood mean I barely remember the dislocation of living in poverty. I remember my dad saying when there wasn't enough food, he wasn't hungry because when you get older, your taste buds stop working. Taking care of us meant he didn't take care of himself as well as he could have. I remember too him telling me when I was very little that when people get older, they can stop dreaming. It seemed then to me, as it does now, the saddest loss of all, to lose your ability to dream. I can still feel the prick of the tears on my 7-year-old face, thinking about not having dreams. My dad, who had been paralysed when he was in his 40s and lost his job, told me the road out of poverty was through education. Dad understood the liberating potential of school and education, and as his oldest surviving son, I got the full benefit of his faith and how the intergenerational gift of education promises you don't have to die in the same world you are born in. Education led me to understand that poverty isn't an accident. I learned that it is a condition created through the deliberate, unequal distribution of wealth. It is fueled by greed. As I became increasingly politicised, recognising the web of injustices that shape the world, I sought for solutions. It led me nearly 40 years ago to Dorothy Heathcote's work and a lifetime of work in school. I was determined to realise the potential for revolutionary action in her pedagogic aesthetic. Inspired by Heathcote's extraordinary practice, I have been making and researching the potential of drama pedagogy ever since. I've made theatre in schools, in prisons, psychiatric hospitals, earthquake zones, with children with disabilities, in programs focusing on family violence and child abuse, suicide prevention, countering the stigma associated with mental illness, and in anti-racism campaigns. I have sought ways in my teaching where we might play in and with possibility, imagine a different and better world, and attempt to be my father's son. Many years ago, I was working with a group of children with varying levels of autism. I played the role of a bus driver and I asked the children where they wanted to go if we had a bus that could take us anywhere. The beach, the zoo. Finally, with growing excitement, we decided to go to London to visit the Queen. We packed imaginary backpacks with all the things we might need for a journey. Scarves and hats and boots were all put on. Imaginary scarves and hats and boots, but some children still needed help from their teacher aides to get them on. I stood at the front of the bus, just rows of chairs in the real world, and collected tickets to board, pressing for each child to tell me where they wanted to go. The bus in our drama kept breaking down, and we had to get off lots of times and, for example, blow air into the tyres. It was exhausting but fun work. We had to show the windshield wipers how to move or push the bus out of a hole on other occasions, each time getting on and off the bus and the children showing me their tickets. One young boy boarded and reboarded the bus, showing little, if any, engagement with our drama. Finally, with Buckingham Palace just in sight, I see he is about to board. I look him in the face. He uncurls his hand and smiles. He has his ticket. He wanted to be on our bus, and he knew how to tell me. And this is what my father understood. Education is about how every one of us can hold out our hands and demand a ticket to go where we need to go in our lives. No one needs to stand alone and silent and watch the world go past them. It's not as if we don't, as human beings, understand the possibility inherent in using the arts to learn. When we are 3 and we want to learn what it is to be our mum, we don't do a Google search on the word mum, do an inquiry method, a worksheet. We instead go into her bedroom, put on her slippers, and wander around in them. Wander and wonder. 3-year-olds use their bodies and their senses and their beginnings of empathy to learn about what it might to be other than themselves. They pick up their crayons to make a mark on the world, to express who and what they are. They dance to learn how to move in the world. They sing so they can learn to talk. Their curiosity to know the world is fueled by their play, by their desire and need to learn. So catching hold of this innate way of knowing, building on its energy and sustaining the curiosity and playfulness of this kind of learning can be so easily lost in an education system focused on other things. Yet I still want my PhD students to be innately curious, to be playful with ideas, take risks, collaborate with others, to use all their senses to engage with what they are learning. The international evidence is crystal clear on the value of the arts in education. Children in arts-rich schools do better academically across all areas of the curriculum. They are more engaged and motivated to come to school. Children who play musical instruments do better at maths. Children who do drama are better at writing. Children who have access to the arts begin to understand and value the power of the imagination. Children who learn to love the arts become adults whose lives are enriched by poetry, dance, music, theatre. They see the possibility and validity of a career in the arts for themselves. Graduates from university courses in the arts have the soft skills increasingly valued by employers: creativity, flexibility, a willingness and ability to think and act with an artist's mind and body. I feel deeply frustrated when I think of how the arts have fared in schools over recent years. I'd argue decades of a focus on literacy and numeracy at the expense of nearly everything else in our schools has killed not just our rich and broad curriculum, but the arts in particular. And I'm not alone in arguing that this has been a deliberate and sustained attack on the principles of quality public education. For state-funded private schools have maintained an arts-rich environment for the children of the wealthy, reinforcing our growing class divide. Learning in the arts alongside all the other curriculum areas are useful in the role of preparing young people for employment. And yet the arts teach us something else, that there is more to life than work. As children and young people learn in the arts to make beautiful things, they move gracefully with others. They blend their voices in harmony. With the stroke of a brush, they create something new, never seen before. Children making art make their families' lives lighter through their performances and the art they make. They realise the importance of beauty and wonder, of making life easier to bear by lifting life beyond the everyday. This is true, except, of course, when they first start learning the recorder. The arts are important in schools because of their contribution to the never-ending drive for personal achievement in literacy and numeracy and preparation for work or preparation for the exam or preparation for the transition from early childhood to primary or transition to nowhere in particular. But they are valuable to learn in and of themselves. They don't need to justify their existence on the basis of what they contribute to individual achievement, for they link to other indicators of a successful country. Indicators we are yet to codify, but maybe when we work out the indicators of well-being, we might think of how schools might help create a nation where we might be more empathetic, kinder, more collaborative, and more genuinely creative. Perhaps we might be able to say the arts matter because they remind us of our humanity, for they reside in the most sacred part of what it means to be alive. We might say the arts are of value because they remind us of infinite possibilities. More than 100 years ago, American philosopher John Dewey said, "The arts are the tools by which we train the imagination." The tools by which we train the imagination. And that might be the most important job we do as educators, beyond training to read and to write, but to train the imagination. Never undervalue the imagination, especially the social imaginary, for it is only when we begin to imagine that our lives, our worlds can be better, that things can change. A society rich in the arts is rich in possibility. Gough Whitlam had a very particular view of the power and importance of the arts. In her eulogy at his funeral, Kate Blanchett heralded the central place the arts had played in his government by quoting Gough. "Of all the objectives of my government, none had a higher priority than the encouragement of the arts, the preservation and enrichment of our cultural and intellectual heritage. Indeed, I would argue that all other objectives of a Labour government, social reform, justice and equity, and the provision of welfare services and educational opportunities, have as their goal the creation of a society in which the arts and the appreciation of spiritual and intellectual values can flourish. Our other objectives are all means to an end. The arts is an end in itself." Perhaps to best understand how the arts might achieve all these things, we should be looking beyond meta-analysis and synthesizing best evidence to the stories of our practice to better understand it. To determine what we do in our classrooms and our schools, we might acknowledge that numbers are ultimately limiting in understanding the messiness of teaching and learning. Perhaps this simple story exemplifies what the arts might achieve in schools. I used to find standing in front of one principal as a kid quite terrifying. Standing in front of 600 is really quite nerve-wracking. You're all very nice, though. So this story, 10 days after the 22nd February earthquake in Christchurch, I worked with schools as they returned. I remember reading in the newspapers that Christchurch would return to normal when schools went back. It didn't happen. Zedan Sadar talks about living in what he calls post-normal times, where we can never return to what we once imagined was normal. I planned workshops with teachers on what they might do when schools reopened, where I could model using drama and the arts with the children on their first day back And I had teachers over the course of the first 2 or 3 days that I worked there, in excess of over 100 teachers watched me work with the little ones as they came back to school. I created a participatory theatre workshop for 5 to 7-year-olds. I start the workshop by telling the story of a little girl who wakes up in the morning to find her cloth of dreams has been torn. I remember asking the children on the first time I ran the workshop what kind of story did they think it would be, and one little boy said it would be a really sad story because if you tear your cloth of dreams, then the colour can run out of your life, and once the colour's gone, it never comes back. I asked the children if they would help the little girl in the story. And they said, and you'll know that 6-year-olds say this, they said yes. They didn't say, well, look, we don't want to, create a culture of dependency. Or, maybe we should wait till we've been asked and invited in to do this work. They were generous. And I asked how they thought they could fix the cloth. And one little girl said, well, what we could do is we could loan her our dreams until she got her cloth repaired. Very generous when you think this was 10 days after their own cloths had been torn. And that's what we did. We drew our dreams. We sat on a very large blank piece of cloth. And the children drew a little girl whose family had suffered terribly, drew herself on a unicorn flying over the land of everything that's good. There was a teacher in the group who was watching, who climbed onto the cloth, started to draw. She drew a tree, a huge oak tree, and I asked her after the workshop why she'd drawn the tree. She said during the quake, she realised she needed to go somewhere safe, and she thought the safest place to go was Hagley Park, because there are oak trees there that have been there for over 100 years. She got to Hagley Park, and the oak trees were tipped on their heads, and their roots were facing to the heavens. So she said, in the drama, I could put the tree back. I could put the roots back to where they belonged. After we had shared our shared dreams, looked at the beautiful, wondrous things we made, the children decided that they could fix the cloth. And I asked how they'd do that, and they said, well, Peter, you'll need some magic thread. How do you make magic thread, I asked. And because it was a lesson, I got them to write that down, so it was meaningful literacy work. And they wrote down the ingredients for the cloth. I then asked, how do you put these ingredients together? And a young girl said, you'll need a cloud bowl. Just to check, how many people have ever heard of a cloud bowl before? It's a wonderful thing about working in the arts. You discover things, you make things that didn't exist until you asked. I asked her if she had one, which is also, you'll recognise that as a really good question, because the girl asked that question, didn't matter what answer she gave, it was the right one. Yes, I have. Well, that's great. No, I haven't. Then we'd have to find one. She did have one. I asked her where it was. She pointed to the other side of the room. And we stood around the cloud bowl and added in the ingredients strong enough to fix torn dream cloths. I asked them to add them in, and the first boy said, you'll need to put in 3 bales of belief. I asked him if belief was heavy or light, and he looked at me and he said, belief, Peter, is very heavy. So we had to haul the belief in, bale after bale. We added cups of love. One of my favourite was 17 giggles that you have with your mother before you go to sleep. And what I realised, and I've realised since, of course, that's what mums were doing, weren't they? When they were putting their children to bed. And children understood what mum was doing as well, even though they were 7. That's asleep. To get your dreams back, you need to have that closeness with mum. Then finally, one little girl, when I said anything else, said, yes, Peter, you'll need a teaspoon of light from the darkest tunnel. I asked her, how do you put in a teaspoon of light? And she stood on her tiptoes and said, "You sprinkle it in. See, the light goes through everything." And we all looked, and we all saw the light, and we saw it go through everything. With UNESCO funding, I developed the Teaspoon of Light Theatre Company, and for 3 years our team worked with children throughout Christchurch's eastern suburbs. About this time a year ago, I was invited to bring the Teaspoon of Light project to Mexico, following their series of earthquakes. The Ministry of Arts and Culture organised for myself and a small team, including my daughter, to work with over 100 different artists in some of the most badly affected schools across Mexico City. We also ran workshops at the National University of Mexico. On the first day, we worked with a group of tertiary students. Many of them had been first responders, digging amongst the rubble immediately after the quake. As they gathered around, pouring their ingredients into the bowl to repair the dream cloth of the little girl in the story, they started to sing, softly at first, and then defiantly, with tears streaming down their faces. Canta y no llores, porque cantando se alegro, cielito lindo. Sing, don't cry, because singing gladdens the hearts. We later learned that it was the song which they, as first responders, had sung amidst the rubble. Later that week, as we worked in schools, different artists worked alongside us. 2 young opera singers sang our little girl to sleep. In another, a flamenco guitarist helped us to perform the dance that helped make the threads join together. In another workshop, as we lifted the cloth off the floor, the dust of new dreams floated into the room. The colour of children's dreams fell on us as a blessing. In one school of 800 children, 6 weeks after the earthquake, only 400 of them had returned to school. When they heard the artists were coming, 100 parents and grandparents arrived at the school with their children. We worked with them all in one overcrowded hall, drawing, painting, laughing, singing, dancing, and on multiple occasions crying. I tell this story today because of my deep belief from teaching drama for nearly 40 years that story is the most powerful of all stories we have as teachers to learn from. We don't so much tell stories of our lives, but we story our life. What might this story tell us of the role of creativity, leadership, and the arts? We had arrived in Mexico amid the Day of the Dead celebrations. We were taken to a small town on the outskirts of Mexico City, where we saw the local community cover the 300-year-old walled cemetery with flowers as families came at night to sit and eat and sing with their dead. The walls of the cemetery were cracked and torn by the recent quakes, and fresh graves marked where some had died when the earth had moved. Costume parades, singing, dancing, and images of the dead from those long ago and those recently lost hung in the streets with the heavy smell of incense. In the coming days, as we worked with the children on reimagining their worlds with hope and dreams restored, I was able to more fully understand that the arts give us our identity because they connect us to the dead, to the grief all humans eventually feel if they live long enough. Albert Wendt knows that the dead are woven into our flesh like the music of bone flutes. And it is the arts that weave their stories, their faces, their lives into who we are as people and as a nation. It is the arts that allow us to bring them in some form back to life again, for us to speak to them, to be with them again. They come to us in the moments when tears spring uncontrollably to our eyes, as the high-pitched call of the kaikaranga sends a shiver down our spine. They come to us when we hear again the songs we once sung together, They walk across our stages, sit inside our novels, dance in our poetry, hang in frames on our walls. They come to us when we need them to help us survive the present, to flourish in the future. I felt Ivan Snook this morning as I finished this talk, and I imagined his critical gaze on what it is that I would say. I used him often as a mentor before I spoke. Moi mai, moi rā e te rangatira, e te hohoki. As we speak through the arts to the dead, we also disinter ghosts. The arts have a way of finding those ghosts we bury deep within our collective consciousness, or they reveal the stories of those deliberately forgotten and obscured from our formal history. The arts carry the potential to challenge and subvert stories that have colonised national ways of knowing. In the New Zealand context, the ghosts of colonisation are regularly awakened by artists who, rather than affirm a singular identity as New Zealanders, challenge and question who we once were and what that means for who we are now. In making decolonising art, Angela Tiatia suggests that her work seeks multiple centres that were in existence before Western contact and colonisation. For Lisa Reihana, her panoramic video of In Pursuit of Venus made her think a lot about how we remember people, who gets to tell the stories, and therefore determine what becomes our history. It asks, who am I and where do I sit? The children we worked with in Mexico drew Mexican trees and Virgin Madonnas, and as we talked of dreams, they talked of their fears about the temblor, the quake. As they made art through singing, dancing, painting, or by talking and roll to the little girl in the story, they were using the arts simultaneously as a way of thinking and feeling about the world and also representing those understandings. They built bridges back to those they had lost, singing and crying and laughing and making beautiful theatre. They felt a sense of community in their coming together to make glorious multicoloured cloths that spoke both of what was lost and what might be. If the arts reconnect us to the past, they can also provide a way of making sense of the present. They allow us to admit to our fears and attempt to transform them. I often think of the teacher in Christchurch who drew the tree on the dream cloth. When the world is tipped on its head, the arts are a way we can, even if it is only in the moment of the making, return the world to how it should be. If the arts are able to help people make sense of the world when it is literally moving beneath their feet, then the arts are vital for young people here in New Zealand. For those who struggle to make it to the future through a present that offers no reassurance, a present that seems to deny the future rather than promise it. In a nation that has spent a generation focusing on the individual and the measure of profit, people's roots have been left exposed, dangling in the air. We need not wonder why so many of our young take their own lives, for instead of connecting to the world in which they live in a world often devoid of hope. So as leaders of schools, I suggest you need to recognise the vital importance and potential the arts have to play here at home, where we have amongst the highest youth suicide rates in the world and the second highest incarceration rate in the world, and spiralling inequality. How might we harness the potential of the arts to truly transform communities that have been marginalised by the economic reforms of the past 35 years? Creative leadership is about more than having fun, being colourful and playful. It is recognising that the meaning-making potential of the arts must be embedded into the fabric of young people's lives. For this story reminds me too that teaching in and through the arts Provide opportunities to talk of the most important things of life, for that too is what the arts do. How might you fix torn dreams? How might you shed only a small amount of light you have so that it can spread the most light? How might you, when you grow old, still keep dreaming? How might you sing when it is easier to cry? How do you show that you understand the bus is leaving without you? These are the important things the arts allow us to ask, to think about. The last time I met with Dorothy Heathcote, she asked me, in New Zealand schools, do children do things that matter? And in doing those things, do they learn they matter too? Do children do things that matter? And in doing those things, do they learn they matter too? When you return to your schools, they're two good questions to keep in the front of your mind. The children I worked with in Christchurch in Mexico also reminded me that drama teaches children to be actors, not spectators, not merely actors for the stage, but actors on, for, and with the world. Earthquakes and much of life in the 21st century renders children as victims, but story and the imagination frees them to imagine answers, to help others, to share what they know of what it is to be alive in difficult times, to see yourself as someone who can heal, shape the world in which you live. The arts might not build resilience, but they reveal it to ourselves. As Dorothy Heathcote said, they teach us those things we didn't know we already knew. How important then might we consider the arts? I'd suggest the arts are vital in schools as they are everywhere else because they are carriers of hope. Awakening young people to the possibilities of joy, of wonder and beauty, of possibility is not a luxury, not something to be ignored or banished to Friday afternoons when the real work of schooling is finished. Perhaps where over a generation of neoliberal assaults on New Zealand have had their most significant impact, of course, has been in our schools. The creation of a two-tiered system that reinforced inequality was, as we've heard this morning, was fed by the introduction of national standards. The standards were deliberately designed and used to publicly humiliate schools and teachers so as to drive a narrowing of the curriculum and a loss of the arts. Schools became places where, as Michael Rowan suggests, the data have landed. First they said they needed data about the children to find out what they're learning. Then they said they needed data about the children to make sure they are learning. Then the children only learnt what could be turned into data. Then the children became data. The rich, broad curriculum that includes the arts as an essential learning area all but disappeared under the endless need to count. In many schools, music, dance, drama and the visual arts became a distant memory buried under the standardised reports on literacy and numeracy. For the arts have almost disappeared in our education system. They have all but disappeared in initial teacher education. Where I work in the Faculty of Education and Social Work at the University of Auckland, the empty music classrooms where once 10 lecturers taught are like ghost ships. From next year, there will not be a music lecturer in primary in the Faculty of Education at the University of Auckland. The instruments there are gathering dust, a mute challenge to what might and should be. Students from my faculty and other faculties around this country graduate with little, if any, knowledge or skill in the teaching of the arts and are bereft of knowing how to use drama pedagogy. And what a tragedy that our newest teachers in our primary schools are likely to be our least creative. The ones most worried in our primary schools as to what to do without the smothering blanket of national standards, and our secondary teachers who think innovation and creativity in teaching is about the use of technology. I genuinely grieve for young people who in the last decade entered teaching full of hopes and dreams about what they might do in classrooms and through no fault of their own, had their creativity stifled by training in universities which was centred around becoming technically proficient, effective teachers rather than imaginative, creative professionals. The kind of teaching I did in Christchurch and Mexico would be beyond them. Many would not know how to start a lesson as I did without a stated learning intention, a will to Walt written on the whiteboard. They wouldn't know how to grab the teaching moment, willing to go where the students took the learning. Cloud bowls, cups of love, bales of belief, teaspoons of light, singing to gladden hearts. These things are only possible when teaching is recognised as an art form, not some technical skill that can be reduced to effect sizes. Teaching, as Elliot Eisner recognised, where flexible purposing allows for the idea that new ends might be sought and realised in teaching when genuine and real questions are asked. We have urgent and important work to do in initial teacher education if we are to make schools alive again with the arts, with creative teachers. And knowledge of these things have long disappeared within a Ministry of Education which has no idea, no interest in the arts or creativity and what it means to us as individuals or a nation. I was interested to listen to the minister today who didn't once use the word creativity. I can imagine the conversation in the Ministry of Education. He's going to a conference to talk about creativity. Have we got anyone in here who knows anything about that? Have we got anyone left in the ministry? It's a tragedy, isn't it? What's the vision? More of the same? Or is it a genuine change? At a different time in this country, there was a ministry with a very different view of the arts of education. It was understood that the true measure of public education is not individual achievement, but in the success of participatory democracy. Placing the focus entirely on achievement, on the accretion of grades, on things that count but barely matter, we have created classes of people disconnected from a sense that they are able to be active participants in their own lives. The important role for the arts after World War II in this country's schools came about as the result of a vision of Peter Fraser, Clarence Beebe, and others, including Gordon Tovey. They believed public education served a vital role in the protection of democracy. Driving their reforms was an understanding that a critically informed population would not be attracted to the dehumanising and fundamentalist beliefs found in Nazism and Stalinism. Central to that philosophy was Dewey's notion of the importance of training the imagination through the arts. A truly democratic society requires people who are fully conscious or fully awake in the world, and Maxine Greene argues it's art making which brings the individual into awakeness. Martha Nussbaum suggests the moral imperatives sitting beneath a democratic society are based on the creation of empathetic citizens. She argues that empathetic imagination has been systematically ignored and severely repressed by neoliberal models of education to a level where, citing Rabindranath Tagore, she suggests, we might end up with a nation of technically trained people who do not know how to criticise authority, useful profit makers with obtuse imagination, a suicide of the soul. The arts provide us with the capacity to imagine and feel what it is to be the other. At a time when some world leaders deliberately feed on our fears of the other, empathy becomes the key competency of 21st century living. For without empathy, fundamental beliefs reduce our humanity. Terror and despair replace hope. The great joy in the story of the teaspoon of light is that children recovering from earthquakes themselves are willing and able to help others. They recognise the need and hope that sits in that act. That they are even prepared to give away their own dreams to make that happen fills me with optimism for the future. People who see themselves as actors, not spectators, producers, not consumers, who are woke are what preserve democracies. I've often wondered about how that little girl who stood at the edge of the cloud bowl knew so much. How did she know that just a teaspoon of light was enough? How did she know that the strongest of light comes not at the end of the darkest tunnel, but from inside it, from the darkest place, that we can only see the stars because of the darkness of the night? I'm grateful that the arts provided an opportunity for her to teach me and the others in that room the importance of how we might use what little light we have as individuals to mend and heal that which has been torn and broken. In the spine-tingling moment of standing on her tiptoes, I remember philosopher Robert Scarry's idea that when we come upon beautiful things, they act like small tears in the surface of the world that pulls us through to some vaster space. Or as Alison Lee reminds us, at times when I confess I'm startled by beauty, by sudden insight, by a glimpse of my soul, everything comes together and apart in one brilliant, elusive flash. I sense the wonderment of feeling human. I'm grateful for the metaphor she gave us as a way of talking about what we do as teachers. I deeply, honestly respect each and every one of you in this room who, despite so much, continue to give, to haul bales of belief every day into your offices and into your staff rooms, who, recognizing that if you sprinkle carefully what little light you have, it might go through everything and truly make a difference in children's lives. If we are to survive the coming years, it will be because we learn to live together and empathize with each other. Creative leadership. It will be through acknowledging and respecting our collective and individual humanity through the arts. It will be because we will remind ourselves that schools are first and foremost places where we learn to become more fully human. Seamus Heaney wrote, "History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on that far side of revenge. Believe that further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracle and curing wells." I have, as many of you in this room have, a great hope for a sea change for education. How might our schools become full of the beauty and joy of learning of the arts? How might our world be made differently when our schools train the imagination so that we might, through our griefs for the past and our dreams of the future, remake ourselves and the world? Let us never grow too old or too weary to dream. Now is the time for hope and history to rhyme. Thank you very much.